and welcome back to the next episode of TILLY. I'm your host, Marisa Zeppieri of A lot of you already know me as LupusChick. If this is your first time here on TILLY, TILLY is brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of New England. We have a new episode every Tuesday night. We usually do 6 episodes in a season. We are wrapping up our 13th season, which means we have almost over 70 episodes you can actually go and watch on our YouTube channels and here in the video libraries on the Facebook at the Lupus Foundation of New England and also LupusChick. So last week we talked about burnout as patients. We usually hear a lot about burnout as caregivers, but we were actually talking about patient burnout. You can go back into last week's video and check that one out. And this week I wanted to chat with you about a question that we get often, is how people can actually start becoming advocates, how they can share their story. And I think this rings true for everyone, that when you're first diagnosed, for you, it might be a year, it might be 5 years. You might be going through so much and it's such a hard time, especially for some of us, until we sort of get things under control as far as our medication, lifestyle changes and things like that. And the furthest thing from your mind might be, getting into some advocacy or sharing your story because you're just not ready yet. And I think that's something that's really important, to even just listen to this message to see sort of what avenues are out there later on. It may not be the right time right now. So I'll just share a little bit. When I was first diagnosed, there was definitely a good 3-year period that I didn't even tell people that I had lupus because, first of all, it was so out of control. We didn't have it under control at the time, but I also had a lot of physical symptoms that you could see on the outside. And at that time, we're going back like 20 years ago, there wasn't social media and things like we have today. So where I lived, even though I was in a huge city in Fort Lauderdale, a lot of people were not familiar with lupus. And so I would constantly get the question, are you contagious? What's wrong with you? What do you have? And so I just didn't even want anyone to see me, which in some ways was kind of easy because I was always in the hospital or at home during that period of my life. But I think I just didn't want anyone to even know that I had this diagnosis because the education and the awareness was so minimal back then that I felt like it was almost like a scarlet letter, right? You hear like these terms, but I already had all of these questions. And so I did not feel comfortable at all to speak about it or to educate people. And honestly, I still had so many questions and things that I had to learn myself. Now, here we are on the total flip side of that, where, LupusChick has grown so much over the last 15 years. I do a lot of things with the Lupus Foundation of New England. And yes, I'm an advocate. I wrote a book, 2 books about lupus. I talk about it very openly now. I have no shame anymore in the fact that I have a diagnosis, and sometimes, visibly it's on my skin. And, I just like to educate people now and answer their questions. And I think, social media does make that somewhat easier, but also I look at it as when I'm able to help someone or educate someone, and then they come across somebody that has lupus, they can actually have a conversation with them and be like, oh, I'm familiar with that, or I know A, B, and C. Or if they come across somebody that's having some strange symptoms, but I've kind of shared, what I went through in the beginning, they may say to that person, oh, you should really consider getting checked for lupus or for autoimmune disease. So I'm in a very much of a different place as far as advocacy, and I've seen it happen with so many people. So I just want to encourage you, if you feel like maybe right now you're not in the best spot, but you think on your radar, it's something that you want to do in the future, definitely listen up. Advocacy looks different for so many people. I think for me, I fell into more of the writing and speaking about it because I was a journalist. So it was just an area that I was already very comfortable in and that I had sort of access to. You might be someone that, you want to work with a nonprofit that's maybe close to your house, and maybe you'll do volunteer work, or maybe you'll lead walks, or you'll organize walks, or maybe you'll advocate in a different way. Everyone has a gift. Maybe you do graphic design, and you'll do something for an organization in terms of that. You might dream of having, your own social media advocacy page, obviously with things like Instagram and TikTok, whether you like to do video, whether you like to do graphics, there's definitely a place out there for any of that. Maybe one day you have dreams of having your own nonprofit that you can help different, patient groups out with. That's what happened with LupusChick. It did not originally start out like that. But that is what it grew into. And then you have nonprofits like the Lupus Foundation of New England, these, major nonprofits that do some really big work. So I feel like there's so many different areas, but I feel like one main area that I see for a lot of advocates is writing about their experiences and, different flares or different issues as far as like one diagnosis. Like maybe it's, a blog or an article about dealing with hair loss, or dealing with, say, like blood clots or kidney issues, or going through a transplant. Like that's something obviously a lot of people with lupus face. And so sometimes it makes it a lot easier when you are speaking with a doctor and they're talking about how down the road, you might be looking at a transplant, and then you come across an article or a video on YouTube or a video on, let's say, Instagram or TikTok about someone that has had a transplant, and they share, what life was like before, what the transplant was like, and how it's changed their life. I feel like it's things like that that really give people a lot of hope. And it's not like you're in a doctor's office and you're getting 10 or 15 minutes, on a high end of information from a doctor. You're actually getting it from a patient, someone that's actually living with the illness. So that's why I think advocacy is so important. And also, for the people that are not yet diagnosed, to be able to hear, especially with lupus, right? No two cases are alike. So the symptoms that I first had before I was diagnosed and the symptoms you first had can be wildly different. And there might be someone out there that is dealing with very similar symptoms to me and has no idea that they should ask their doctor for some testing for lupus, or they might be really similar to what you went through. And that's another reason why I think it's crucial that we all share our story, because our stories are so different. So good places to start, like I mentioned, are creating social media accounts, creating websites with blogs on them. It could be something really simple. Like you can use a beautiful template from a platform like Wix, like a beautiful blog template. And pretty much, some of them are stunning and they're just pre-made, and you can just start writing. You get a domain name and you can kind of be on your way. And that's originally how I started. I was doing journalism, but I also started LupusChick as a blog. And, for me, because I'm in my 40s, like we had pen pals when I was younger. Like we actually wrote to people in the mail, and we didn't have social media. We didn't have blogs. So I kind of looked at it as like a way to be pen pals, but online. This is when blogs first started out. And it was really neat because I was able to talk to people in like Russia and Africa and Italy and Canada that were getting, going through the process of getting diagnosed, and they had no one to talk to. Some people were in really remote areas, and, they had no one in their town or their village that had lupus. So it was just kind of a connection point. If you don't really want to take the step of maybe starting a blog or a website, you can go on websites like medium.com and set up an account, and you can write articles on there for free about your diagnosis or whatever story that you want to share as far as chronic illness, and you can advocate in that way. It may not be a personal story. You might want to, let's say, for Lupus Awareness Month, 10 things you should know about lupus, like just to educate. And it doesn't have to have anything about you. It could just be 10 facts about lupus that somebody should know. And, you publish it in May or whenever, and whoever, Medium has millions of readers, but it can just be more of an educational format. It doesn't necessarily have to be a first person format. Of course, there are bigger ways to advocate. You can start your own nonprofit, which is a whole journey into itself, and that would take an entire very long TILLY episode to kind of go into. But if you connect with different organizations, you can go to the Capitol and you can speak to people in government and talk to them about where funding is going for lupus. You can share your story often when you go to places like DC and things like that. And it helps for them to see patients being involved because they can hear stories from people from secondhand, they can read something, but to have an actual person with lupus in front of you sharing what they've gone through, I think is so impactful. And they remember that hopefully when it comes time to consider, putting in money or funding or research into a certain diagnosis group. So I'd say, really think about what you want to share, how much you're willing to share, how much you're willing to put out there. And I always talk to people about boundaries. So you don't ever want to share something that you're going to be uncomfortable about later. And that, because obviously we know once things go online, it's pretty impossible to delete them, right? And get rid of them. So you may not want to put it all out there. That may be some things later down the road that you want to talk to. There are definitely topics that I didn't talk about probably for the first 10 years. I just wasn't comfortable enough, one, speaking on them, and two, I wasn't comfortable enough just putting them out there for everyone. And there's still things that I don't share, and that's okay. So you don't have to think about if you're an advocate, then you have to tell everything. That's not it. You might be just more someone that shares education and stuff about research or stuff about clinical trials. Maybe it isn't so you focused. So I just want you to keep that in mind as well. If you're in the Northeast, you should definitely check out the Lupus Foundation of New England. They have a lot of in-person events. There's different ways to volunteer. There's obviously other lupus organizations depending on where you live, but you can always go to Lupus Foundation of New England and see what ways that you can get involved there, because they're an incredible organization, my personal favorite. And even with LupusChick, we have different ways for you to share your story and to volunteer as well. So if you are an advocate or you're just getting into advocacy, I'd love to learn more about it. Definitely leave a comment below. Share how you got started. People love, reading in the comments, and it's just a good way to kind of share more ideas. And maybe someone that's watching will be like, oh, okay, well, this person did it that way, and that sounds like the right path for me. So we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions about getting started, also please leave them in the comments and we will respond. But I just want to thank you again for being part of our TILLY series. Definitely go back now that we're going to be starting season 14 soon. Definitely go back, check out our video library. We have so many interviews. We have so many topics that we talk about. Some of them are very intimate, like intimacy and your sex life. And then we have other things like disability and employment. You name it. I feel like we've almost talked about it on TILLY. So I just want to thank you for being here. Thank the Lupus Foundation of New England. And we look forward to spending some more time with you soon with an all new revamped version of TILLY that will be starting soon for season 14. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.